The grand halls of the von Adler residence in Berlin were alive with an air of extravagant tension. Chandeliers hung like frozen stars from the ceiling, illuminating the faces of the elite gathered below. It was 1943, and the world outside was engulfed in chaos. Yet inside these walls, the upper crust of Nazi society reveled in their illusion of grandeur and control. Among them was Clara von Adler, the daughter of a high-ranking Nazi officer. She stood apart from the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest as she surveyed the opulence surrounding her. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the perfumed glances exchanged, none of it resonated with her spirit. Clara longed for more than the gilded cage in which she found herself. She was a young woman of 20, with fierce blue eyes and a head of fiery red hair that seemed to defy the somber atmosphere of her surroundings. Raised in a home that prized loyalty to the Reich above all, Clara felt suffocated by the expectations placed upon her. It was as if she were living a lie, wearing a mask of conformity that stifled her true self. A burgeoning sense of justice stirred within her, battling against the indoctrination that had been instilled since childhood. As she moved through the crowd, her thoughts drifted to the whispers of resistance she had heard in hushed tones, stories of bravery and sacrifice that ignited a spark of hope within her. She could not shake the feeling that her life was meant for more than this hollow existence. She wished for freedom, for love, and for a cause worth fighting for. It was at that moment, amid the laughter and the clamor, that her gaze fell upon him. Thomas, a man whose presence seemed to command the room without uttering a word. He was not dressed in the garb of the elite. Rather, he wore a simple yet impeccably tailored suit, the kind that suggested he was a man of substance rather than privilege. His dark hair was tousled just enough to appear effortlessly charming, and when their eyes met, Clara felt as if the world around them had faded, leaving only the two of them suspended in time. Before we start, I'd love to ask for your support. Subscribing helps me keep creating and sharing these stories with you. Clara could sense that he was not one of the usual guests, and as he approached her, a mixture of intrigue and trepidation washed over her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice smooth, yet laced with an undertone of something deeper, a hidden urgency. Clara hesitated, glancing around at the faces of her father's associates, all of whom would judge her for stepping outside the confines of their expectations. But the yearning for connection was too strong. She nodded, and he took her hand, leading her to the center of the ballroom. As they began to sway to the music, Clara felt a thrill coursing through her. Thomas moved with grace, and she found herself lost in the rhythm, entranced not just by his skill, but by the way he looked at her, as though she were the only person in the room. "Your father must be very proud," Thomas remarked, his eyes searching hers for a hint of rebellion. "Proud of what?" Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of the atrocities committed in the name of a twisted ideology. I cannot share in his pride." A flicker of surprise crossed Thomas's face, but it was quickly replaced by admiration. "Then you are braver than most," he said, his tone earnest. "It takes courage to question the world around you, especially when the stakes are so high." Clara's heart raced. "And what of you? Are you here for the cause or for the party?" He hesitated, and for a fleeting moment, Clara caught a glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes. "I am here for something far more dangerous," he replied, his voice low. "I'm on a mission, and your father is a significant player in a game that has cost too many lives." "Then you must be careful," Clara urged, her voice tinged with urgency. "The Gestapo is everywhere. They won't hesitate to root out anyone they suspect." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of her father, a tall, imposing figure whose presence cast a shadow over the room. Clara's heart sank as he approached, his gaze shifting between her and Thomas. The tension in the air thickened, and she felt the weight of her family's legacy pressing down upon her. "Who is this?" her father demanded, his tone authoritative. "Just a friend I met," Clara replied quickly, trying to mask the truth that hung between them like a fragile thread. Thomas offered a polite smile, but Clara could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, sir. I've heard much about the von Adler name," he said, his voice steady. Her father scrutinized Thomas, searching for any hint of subversion. Clara knew that her father's eyes were sharp, and Thomas would need to tread carefully to avoid arousing suspicion. "I hope you are not here to discuss politics," her father said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Of course not," Thomas said smoothly. "I'm merely enjoying the evening, as any guest should." As her father turned away, Clara felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was short-lived. She knew that the fleeting connection she had forged with Thomas was fraught with danger. Each shared glance, every word spoken in the confines of that ballroom, was a risk that could cost them both dearly. "Meet me," he whispered, leaning closer, the warmth of his breath sending shivers down her spine. "There's a place I know, away from prying eyes. I'll be waiting." Before she could respond, he stepped back into the crowd, disappearing among the revelers. A whirlwind of emotions surged within her, fear, excitement, and a longing that threatened to consume her. The evening wore on, but Clara's mind could not escape the magnetic pull of Thomas. Later that night, as the last of the guests trickled out, Clara found herself standing in her dimly lit room, heart racing as she considered the risk of meeting him. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows that danced across her walls. The weight of her family's expectations pressed heavily upon her. Should she follow the rules and remain the dutiful daughter, or should she seize this moment for herself? As dawn broke, Clara made her decision. She would meet him. The thought alone sent a thrill through her. She had spent too long living in the shadows, and now for the first time she felt the stirrings of hope. In the early hours, Clara slipped out of her home, her heart pounding as she navigated the quiet streets of Berlin. The air was crisp, and the city felt eerily still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. She arrived at the rendezvous point, a small cafe tucked away from the more frequented streets, where the sounds of war felt distant, almost muted. Thomas was already there, leaning against the wall, a figure of calm in the storm that raged around them. His eyes lit up as Ila sia proximo, and Clara felt a rush of warmth flood through her. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I had to," she replied, her heart racing. "I've never felt so alive." They sat across from each other, the small table a fragile barrier between their worlds. Clara could see the determination in his eyes, the burden of his mission weighing heavily on his shoulders. "Every day I risk everything to gather information," he explained, his voice low and urgent. "Your father is part of a plan that could change the course of this war. I need to know more, and you can help me." Clara's heart sank at the thought of betraying her father, yet the spark of rebellion ignited within her. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice steady. "I need access to the files in your father's office. I know he has documents that could turn the tide," Thomas explained, his gaze unwavering. "But I can't do it alone. I need you." In that moment, Clara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she also felt a sense of purpose. She had a choice to make, one that could alter the course of her life and the lives of many others. "I'll help you," she said, her voice a whisper of defiance, "but we must be careful. My family is always watching." As they plotted their next steps, a bond began to form between them, one built on shared ideals, dangerous secrets, and the intoxicating thrill of forbidden love. Clara knew there would be no turning back from this path, but for the first time she felt a sense of hope. Not just for herself, but for a future where love could triumph over hatred. The days that followed were a blur of clandestine meetings and stolen moments. Clara used every ounce of her cunning to gather information, slipping past her father's watchful gaze as she navigated the minefield of her double life. Each encounter with Thomas deepened their connection, and Clara found solace in their shared dreams of a better world. But with the Gestapo's shadow looming ever closer, Clara's sense of urgency grew. The clock was ticking, and they both knew that time was a luxury they could no longer afford. As the final days approached, the weight of their secret pressed heavily upon them, and Clara could feel the tensions rising. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. But as she looked into Thomas's eyes, she saw a flicker of hope that ignited her spirit. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would fight for the love that had blossomed amidst the ruins of war. Clara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders as she hurried through the dimly lit streets of Berlin, her heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The air was thick with tension, the distant sounds of war echoing like a constant reminder of the chaos surrounding her. Each step she took felt like a step into the unknown, a leap of faith towards a future she could scarcely imagine. She was no longer just the daughter of a Nazi officer. She was a woman determined to define her own destiny, even if it meant risking everything she held dear. The rendezvous point was an inconspicuous cafe tucked away in a narrow alley, a place where whispers of rebellion mingled with the aroma of strong coffee and freshly baked bread. Clara pushed the door open, the small bell tinkling softly overhead as she entered. The cafe was sparsely populated, mostly by patrons who kept their heads down, lost in their thoughts or conversations that carried the weight of secrets. She felt an electric thrill as her eyes scanned the room, searching for the familiar figure of Thomas. He was seated in a corner, his back to the wall, a newspaper spread out before him, its headlines blurred by the tension in the air. When their eyes met, a smile broke across his face and the world around her faded away. It was as if they were the only two people left in existence, two souls intertwined in a dance of defiance against the odds stacked against them. "Clara," he greeted, his voice low and filled with warmth. "You made it." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. The moment their hands brushed, a spark ignited between them, a reminder of their shared purpose and the bond that had formed in the shadow of war. As they settled into a hushed conversation, the atmosphere shifted from apprehension to intimacy. They spoke in cautious tones, sharing snippets of their lives, their dreams and their fears. Clara revealed her struggles with the expectations placed upon her by her family and the regime, while Thomas recounted his journey as an undercover operative, the constant threat of discovery lurking behind every smile and handshake. "I never thought I'd find someone like you here," Thomas confessed, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and vulnerability. "Your courage is inspiring, Clara. It takes a special kind of strength to stand against everything you've been taught." Clara felt a rush of warmth at his words, a sense of validation that she had longed for amidst the oppressive atmosphere of her upbringing. "And you risk your life every day for a cause greater than yourself. It's easy to lose hope in times like these, but you remind me that there's still a chance for change." Their connection deepened as they shared stories of their pasts, their laughter mingling with the tension that hung in the air. Clara found solace in Thomas's presence, a refuge from the storm brewing outside. Each moment spent with him felt like a fleeting escape from reality, a reminder that love could flourish even in the darkest of times. But the veneer of tranquility was shattered when Clara's gaze flickered toward the entrance. A figure she recognized, one of her father's associates, stepped inside, scanning the room with a predatory gaze. Panic surged through her, a visceral reminder of the risks they were taking. She leaned closer to Thomas, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to go now." They slipped out of the cafe, the chill of the evening air wrapping around them like a shroud. Clara's heart raced as they navigated the labyrinthine streets, the shadows of their surroundings becoming both a sanctuary and a prison. Each footfall echoed in her mind, a reminder of the urgency that propelled them forward. "Where to now?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. Clara could see the determination etched on his face, a reflection of her own resolve. "There's a safe house nearby," she replied, her mind racing as she plotted their course. "It's run by a group of resistance fighters. They can help us gather the supplies we need for our escape." As they hurried through the night, Clara felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Each decision they made carried the potential for life or death, hope or despair. She was no longer just a naive girl dreaming of freedom. She was a woman willing to fight for the love she had found and the life she wished to reclaim. When they finally arrived at the safe house, Clara felt a surge of relief wash over her. The building was modest, its facade worn and unassuming, but inside it pulsed with the energy of those who refused to succumb to the darkness. They were greeted by a group of weary but determined individuals, their faces etched with the marks of hardship and resilience. "Clara!" one of the women exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her. "We were worried about you. We've heard whispers of the Gestapo increasing their patrols. You must be careful." "I will," Clara promised, her voice firm. "I have someone I want you to meet." She gestured toward Thomas, who stood slightly behind her, his presence a steadying force. As introductions were made, Clara felt a sense of camaraderie growing among them. Each person in the room shared a common goal, a desire to resist oppression and fight for a future where love and freedom could coexist. She and Thomas explained their plan, detailing the supplies they needed and the urgency of their situation. The group listened intently, nodding in understanding, their expressions reflecting a mixture of admiration and concern. "We can help," one of the men said, his voice resolute. "But you must be cautious. The Gestapo is watching everyone closely. We have to be strategic in our movements." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. I promise we will be careful." As the night wore on, they worked together, gathering supplies and discussing potential routes for their escape. Clara and Thomas found a moment of solitude amidst the chaos, stepping outside into the cool night air. The stars twinkled overhead, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of their struggles. "Do you think we'll make it?" Clara asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Thomas turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "We have to believe we will. Hope is our greatest weapon, Clara. Even in the darkest of times, we must hold on to it." Their fingers intertwined as they stood in the stillness, the world around them fading into insignificance. In that moment, Clara felt an undeniable connection to Thomas, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. She understood the risks they were taking, but she also knew that love was worth fighting for. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the city, Clara's sense of urgency intensified. They had only 72 hours left before the Gestapo would close in on them, and every passing minute felt like a ticking clock, counting down to an uncertain future. With the help of the resistance fighters, they devised a plan to secure transportation out of Berlin. They would need to navigate through checkpoints and evade patrols, relying on the trust they had built with their newfound allies. Clara's heart raced at the thought of their impending journey, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through her veins. As they prepared to leave the safe house, Clara felt a sense of bittersweet longing. She was leaving behind the only life she had ever known, the family that had shaped her identity, but she was also stepping into a world filled with possibilities. Her heart ached at the thought of her father's disappointment, but she knew she could no longer live in his shadow. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. He stood beside her, his expression a mix of determination and concern. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I am. We have to do this." With a final glance at the safe house, they stepped into the unknown, the weight of their choices heavy upon them. Together, they would face whatever dangers lay ahead, united by their love and their shared desire for freedom. Clara knew that the road would be treacherous, but with Thomas by her side, she felt a flicker of hope that ignited her spirit. They were two souls caught in the storm of war, but they would not be swept away. Together, they would fight for their love, for their freedom, and for a future worth living. As Clara and Thomas stepped into the night, the dimly lit streets of Berlin loomed before them, shadows twisting and merging in the flickering glow of street lamps. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant sounds of sirens and the occasional rumble of military vehicles. Every corner felt like a potential trap, every alleyway a hiding place for lurking dangers. Yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, a surge of adrenaline coursed through Clara's veins, igniting a newfound resolve. "Where do we go now?" she whispered, glancing up at Thomas, whose eyes reflected the weight of their precarious situation. The urgency of their escape gnawed at her, but so did the unyielding bond they had forged in the darkness of war. "We'll head to the canal," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "From there we can reach the safe house. It's not far, but we have to move quickly." With her heart pounding, Clara nodded, knowing that every moment counted. As they hurried through the narrow streets, she felt the familiar pang of fear mix with an overwhelming sense of purpose. For the first time, she was truly stepping away from her father's shadow, from the oppressive expectations that had stifled her spirit. Thomas was her partner, her ally, and the man she had come to love against all odds. Together, they were breaking free from the chains of their pasts. The canal came into view, its waters shimmering under the moonlight. Clara could hardly contain her excitement and anxiety as they approached the edge. Thomas scanned the surroundings, his instincts sharp as he sensed the danger lurking nearby. They could not afford to be caught now. It would mean certain death for both of them. "Wait," he said, suddenly halting. "We need to make sure it's clear." Clara's heartbeat quickened as she clutched the strap of her satchel, the small bag containing the few essentials she had managed to gather. The sounds of the city felt amplified in her ears, and she held her breath, praying for a moment of quiet. After a few tense moments, Thomas nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "Let's go," he urged, and they stealthily approached the water's edge. Just as they were about to climb down to the canal, a sudden rustle in the bushes caught Clara's attention. She froze, her instincts screaming at her to run, but Thomas's hand on her arm steadied her. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. From the shadows emerged a figure, a young man clad in a tattered uniform. Clara's heart sank. He was one of them, a soldier of the regime she had spent her life trying to escape. The soldier was scanning the area, his gaze piercing the darkness, and Clara barely dared to breathe. "Do you see anything?" he called out, his voice gruff and authoritative. "No, sir," came the reply from another soldier, the two of them standing just a few feet away from Clara and Thomas. They exchanged a wary glance, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. The world outside their little bubble seemed to fade away, leaving only the pounding of Clara's heart. "Let's go," Thomas urged, pulling Clara back into the shadow of the nearby building. They crouched low, pressing their bodies against the cold stone as the soldiers' voices faded into the distance. For a moment, Clara felt as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, their breaths synchronized as they waited for the danger to pass. After what felt like an eternity, Thomas exhaled a shaky breath. "We need to keep moving." "They'll be back," he said, the urgency of his tone igniting a fire within Clara. The canal's path was narrow and treacherous, but they carefully maneuvered along the edge, their hearts racing in sync with their hurried footsteps. With each passing moment, Clara felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She was no longer just the officer's daughter. She was a woman in love, fighting for her life and future. As they reached a secluded area along the canal, an old rowboat bobbed gently in the water, its paint peeling and weathered. Thomas gestured toward it, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope. "This will do. It's not much, but it'll get us across." Clara's heart sank at the thought of crossing the canal in such a fragile vessel. "What if it capsizes?" she asked, doubt creeping into her voice. "Then we swim," he replied, with a reassuring smile, though she could see the tension etched in his features. "We'll be fine. Just trust me." With a resolute nod, Clara stepped into the boat, and they pushed off from the bank, the water lapping softly against the sides. The moon reflected on the surface, casting shimmering patterns that danced in the darkness. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. As they glided across the water, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her mind raced with thoughts of the Gestapo, their relentless pursuit shadowing them like a dark cloud. She turned to Thomas, who was focused on navigating the boat, the muscles in his arms taut with concentration. "Do you think they know we're gone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "If they do, they'll be looking for us," he replied, his eyes scanning the banks as they passed. "But we can't think about that now. We need to focus on getting to safety." They reached the opposite bank, and Clara felt a surge of relief as they climbed out of the boat and onto solid ground. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but they pressed on, determination fueling their every step. As they moved deeper into the shadows, Clara couldn't help but steal glances at Thomas, his presence comforting her in the midst of turmoil. "I never thought I'd be here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Running away from everything I've known." "You're not running away, Clara," Thomas replied, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're running towards something, toward a future that's yours to define. We have to believe that we can make it." His words resonated within her, igniting a spark of hope she had thought extinguished. Together they navigated through the winding streets, keeping close to the walls of buildings, every shadow a reminder of the precariousness of their existence. As they approached the safe house, Clara's heart raced with anticipation. The door stood ajar, a small haven amidst the chaos surrounding them. Just as they stepped inside, the sound of footsteps echoed down the street. "Quick, inside," Thomas urged, pulling her through the door and closing it behind them. The dim light of the room was a stark contrast to the darkness outside, and Clara's heartbeat echoed in her ears. "Do you think they saw us?" she asked, panic rising in her chest as she glanced toward the door. "I don't know," he replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to be quiet and stay hidden until we figure out our next move." They stood in the cramped room, the air thick with tension. Clara could hear the muffled sounds of the city outside, the distant cries of sirens cutting through the night. It was a stark reminder of the reality they were living, a reality where their lives hung by a thread. As they waited in silence, Clara felt the weight of their choices crashing down upon her. She turned to Thomas, her voice trembling. "What if we don't make it? What if this is the end?" He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll face it together. No matter what happens, we're in this together. You're not alone." His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, and in that moment Clara understood the depth of their connection. They were bound not just by love, but by a shared belief in a better future, one that they would fight for against all odds. Hours passed in tense silence, the world outside continuing to spiral into chaos. Clara's mind raced with thoughts of her family, the life she had known and the choices she had made. But now, standing here with Thomas, she recognized the strength that surged within her. She was willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom, for the love that had blossomed in the darkest of times. As dawn approached, Clara and Thomas knew that their time was running out. The Gestapo would soon resume their search, and they had to act quickly. Thomas pulled out a map he had managed to obtain, spreading it across the small table. "We have a few options for a route," he said, tracing his finger across the lines. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't afford to be caught." Clara leaned over the map, her heart racing as she studied the lines and symbols. "What about this path?" She pointed, her finger trembling slightly. "It leads to the countryside. We could find a hiding place there." "That's risky," Thomas replied, his brow furrowing in thought. "But it might be our best shot. If we can reach the forest, we'll have a better chance of avoiding detection." As they discussed their options, Clara felt a sense of determination wash over her. This was her moment to choose her own destiny, to step away from the life that had been dictated to her. With each plan they crafted, she felt the weight of her father's expectations beginning to lift, replaced by a sense of agency and purpose. "Okay," Clara said, her voice steady. "Let's do it. We'll take the route to the countryside." Thomas looked at her, a mix of admiration and gratitude in his eyes. "You're incredibly brave, Clara. I'm proud of you." Before she could respond, a loud bang echoed from outside, jolting them both. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the sound, the unmistakable noise of a boot kicking a door. The Gestapo were here. "Hide!" Thomas hissed, and they scrambled to find a place to conceal themselves. Clara dove behind a dusty old wardrobe, her breath quickening as she pressed herself against the wood. She could hear the shouts of the soldiers outside, the chaos unfolding just beyond the thin walls. "Search the place. They can't have gone far." The commanding voice sent chills down her spine, and Clara's heart raced as she held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. Through a crack in the wardrobe, Clara caught a glimpse of Thomas, his face set in determination as he stood near the door, ready to confront whatever dangers lay ahead. She wanted to scream for him to run, to save himself, but she knew that they were in this together. Their fates were intertwined, and she wouldn't let him face it alone. The door burst open, and soldiers flooded into the room, their boots thudding against the wooden floor. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched, terror gripping her as they searched the space, their voices growing louder and more frantic. "Check behind the furniture. They must be hiding somewhere." The urgency in their tone sent a chill down Clara's spine. But just as the soldiers were about to approach the wardrobe, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. A commotion erupted outside, drawing the soldiers' attention. "What's happening?" one of them shouted as they rushed toward the window. In that fleeting moment of distraction, Thomas met Clara's gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Now," he mouthed silently, and Clara knew what they had to do. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed the wardrobe aside, and they bolted for the door. Heart racing, Clara followed Thomas into the chaos of the outside world, the sounds of sirens and shouting blending into a cacophony of fear and uncertainty. They sprinted through the narrow streets, keeping low and moving swiftly, their bodies fueled by desperation and hope. The city was alive with the sounds of war, But Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose as they dashed through the alleys, determined to reach the countryside before it was too late. "Over there," Thomas shouted, pointing toward a narrow path that led into the woods. They veered into the darkness, the trees looming overhead like guardians of their escape. As they plunged deeper into the forest, the sounds of the city began to fade, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the whisper of the wind. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs ached, but they didn't stop. Each step took them further away from the life they had known, closer to the freedom they so desperately sought. Finally, they stumbled upon a small clearing, the sunlight filtering through the branches above, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Clara collapsed onto the grass, her heart racing as she tried to catch her breath. "We made it," she gasped, looking up at Thomas, who stood beside her, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "For now," he replied, glancing back toward the path they had come. "But we can't stop. We need to keep moving, build a plan." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of their situation settle back onto her shoulders. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to find a safe place to lay low," Thomas said, scanning the area. "There are resistance groups in the countryside. If we can reach them, they might help us." With a newfound sense of purpose, Clara sat up, brushing dirt from her clothes. "Then let's find them. We can't give up now." As they prepared to move again, Clara felt a rush of gratitude for the man beside her. In the midst of the chaos, their love had blossomed, defying the odds stacked against them. They were two souls intertwined in the fight for freedom, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. With their hearts united, they stepped into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever destiny awaited them. The world outside was fraught with danger, but Clara felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. They were alive together, and that was all that mattered. As they ventured deeper into the woods, Clara held on to the dream of a future where they would no longer be hunted, where love could flourish without fear. With Thomas by her side, she knew they would fight for their love and their freedom no matter the cost, and in the heart of darkness, they would find the light.